Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 26 reads, "Neither shalt thou bring an abomination into thine house, lest thou be a cursed thing like it, but thou shalt utterly detest it, and thou shalt utterly abhor it, for it is a cursed thing." What we have here in the book of Deuteronomy is Moses is writing his final text to the new generation of Hebrew children who had been raised up, and they were preparing to enter the promised land, an endeavor that he doesn't get to be part of because of his own sin. And so he's telling them, restating the law, giving them God's expectations. And one thing we see that is important is that when they do enter the land, they were to understand that they were God's hand of judgment against the Canaanites. The Canaanites had become very sinful. They had become approving and accepting of those things that God had said were wrong and evil. And so they were going to move in and take over the land. They were going to wipe out the people that lived there. But they were also supposed to wipe out their sin and elements of their sinfulness. They were not to adopt the evil that had corrupted the cultures that were there and were now bringing about their judgment. And we see that as we look in the same chapter, Deuteronomy 7, up at verse 22. "And the Lord thy God will put out those nations before thee, little by little. Thou mayest not consume them at once, lest the beast of the field increase upon thee. But the Lord thy God shall deliver them unto thee, and shall destroy them with a mighty destruction until they be destroyed. And he shall deliver their kings into thine hand, and thou shalt destroy their name from under heaven. There shall no man be able to stand before thee until thou have destroyed them." So he's like, you're going to go in and you're going to wipe out these cultures. You're my hand of judgment upon them. And then he says in the next two verses, and by the way, don't start doing what they're doing. Don't adopt the sinfulness of these cultures. I want you to be different. Verse 25, "The graven images of their gods ye shall burn with fire. Destroy their idols. Thou shalt not desire the silver or gold that is in them, nor take it unto thee, lest thou be snared therein, for it is an abomination to the Lord thy God." He's saying when you get into the land and I give it to you and you encounter the objects of their sinfulness, you need to get rid of that. Don't start looking at the desirable parts. Realize that it is this sinfulness that they accepted that has corrupted their cultures and has now led to judgment, because that is the way sin works. Sin always offers you something. There's always some benefit to sinning. There's something that makes it desirable. And if we're not careful, we'll know that sin is bad for us. We'll know that it's destroying us on the inside, but there's something about that sin that we really like, something that we latch onto and we hang on to it and we will not let it go, because whenever somebody brings it up or you hear about it in a sermon or you read about it in scripture, and actually if you latch on to sin long enough, you'll start ignoring those things because it makes you feel bad, right? That's just the way it is. But you'll hold on to it, and whenever someone brings it up that you really got to get this sin out of your life, the answer becomes, yeah, except, and then you list the benefit. Except it makes me feel good, except, I get more friends this way, except it makes me happy, except it's a lot of fun. And then that sin stays in our lives, and then it wreaks its destruction. Verse 26, "Neither shalt thou bring an abomination into thine house, lest thou be a cursed thing like it." You're going to start to emulate that sin. The consequences and corruption that sin can cause, you start to take that on yourself. You begin to suffer the consequences. You bring trash into your life, eventually you're going to start to smell bad. And it says, "Thou shalt utterly detest it, thou shalt utterly abhor it, for it is a cursed thing." We need to look at sin for what it is. Sin is evil. Sin is an absolute affront to God. Sin is wrong and not something that we should play with. It's not something that we should get close to as far as accepting into our lives. It's not the way it's supposed to work. And the culture will say, oh, these sinful things are okay, and that we should accept them, and how dare we not accept them. But the fact of the matter is, if we read to the end of Scripture, we see that current cultures are going to be punished for their sin, and we should not adopt those things that is going to produce that punishment that is going to cause the wrath of God to come out upon them. Now, if you find yourself to be a hyper-dispensationalist, you say, well, that's in the Old Testament, that doesn't count. Consider what it says in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, It says, starting in verse 14, "Be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers, for what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness, and what communion hath light with darkness? And what concord hath Christ with Belial? Or what part hath he that believeth with an infidel? And what agreement hath the temple of God with idols? For ye are the temple of the living God. As God hath said, I will dwell in them, and will walk in them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Wherefore come out from among them, and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you." And this isn't God saying, don't interact with the sinful world and with the sinful culture. What it's saying is, don't be accepting or approving of things that are wrong. We saw Jesus in Scripture, and he spent time with the publicans and the sinners, but what he was doing was he was interacting with the culture, but he was changing it. He wasn't adopting the sinfulness that came with it. We're not supposed to say, oh, I'm too good for other people because I obey the Lord. That's not the point at all. That is not how that works. What is being stated here is, do not adopt the sinfulness of the culture around you. Instead, change the culture around you to emulate the truth and that which is right and good. We're not supposed to be thermometers. We're not supposed to adjust to our circumstances. Instead, we're supposed to be thermostats, causing the surrounding environment to change because of us.